Slicked up as much as possible. You might be right on, you might even be just a touch lean. This is with a 49-inch pitch, 64 by 49 wood prop. But take careful note of what you see there. Then go to full throttle, straight and level. And again, take note of what happens to the EGTs and what RPM you get to. On a Zenith with a 49-inch prop, about 3150 is probably the most you're going to see. And again, it's part of that induced drag thing that we talked about yesterday, where on a Zenith, you get up there that 130 to 40 mile an hour, that induced drag curve starts to turn, go straight up, I think. And that's about all you can get is 3150 or so, maybe 3175. But take note of what your exhaust gas temperatures are at that full throttle, and what the engine feels like, sounds like. If it's shaking a little bit, we need to know why it's doing that. Is it too rich, too lean? And then make adjustments accordingly. If you aren't sure where to go, call us up. But call us up with some data for us to work with. I get guys all the time who call and we say, well, what's your EGT temps? Well, I never looked. I said, well, what RPM was this happening at? Well, I'm not sure, but the engine was shaking. Well, there's not a whole lot we can do unless we have some data to work with. So take that little tape recorder, take a clipboard as Tony does and so forth, and take note of these things. Ideally, let me graph some things out here. Make a little graph of temperature on that side and RPM on this side. And we'll start, well, I'll even start at 800, and let's go to 1500 and 2000, 25, and let's go to 3000 and 33 at the end there. And let's start exhaust gas temperatures down here again at about 8 or so, and let's go to 1000, let's go to 1100, 1200, 1300, and 1400. Okay, the carburetor should function something like this. You're going to be somewhere down between 800 and 1000 at idle, and this will increase. Let's go to about, let's say this is 28 right there. Okay, let me shoot over here. 1400 at 28, and this is a relatively smooth increase. Get up to about 25, we're almost all the way up there, and it flattens out a little bit up to about 28. Okay, you get over 29, starts to go back down again, so that at 3300 or full power, wide open throttle, you're going to be about 1200. Okay, peak will be running in here from about 25 to 28.5 RPM, 2500 to 2850, 1400. Plus or minus 1425, 1385. Right in there, that's acceptable. In the close neighborhood of 1400 degrees at your normal cruise RPMs. And we'll put that from 25 to 2850. Call that a normal cruise RPM. If you're above that, approaching 1500, you need a bigger jet. If you're below that, at 1200, and with a Zenith, being below is more likely than being above. If it was a Lightning, it's more likely to be above than below. Again, airframe drag, how slick the airplane is, prop loading. With the Zenith, not unusual to be at 1300 here instead of 1400. Jet sizes, the needle jet, the mid-range jet standard on your engine will be a 2.85. Anybody know what that 2.85 signifies? 2.85 millimeters is the size of the hole. Okay, Zenith, maybe a 2.80 or a 2.78 might put it right where it needs to be. Again, those jets are about $8 a piece, so it costs you 16, or if you try 3 of them, it costs you 16 or $24 and a little bit of time to get it right.
Which one comes with the kit?
2.85.
2.8.
Yeah, that's an old carburetor. New engines are 2.85.
So with 701, I probably going down to
701, yeah, you might start at a 2.78 and go down from there even a little bit. Yep. Mm-hmm. Let me make one more little drawing here.
So you're saying that the Zenith is going to tend to run rich?
Yeah, a little more prop load because it's a little draggier airplane than the Jabiru J250, for instance. A little draggier airframe. See, the Jabiru J250 with that same 49-inch prop will cruise at 121 knots. And like Tony's 601 was cruising at 105 knots. Same RPM, roughly. So a little difference in airframe drag, hence prop loading and throttle opening.
Should we start with the 2.8 jet? Or the 285?
You can. Yeah, with the 601, I wouldn't hesitate to start with a 2.8,
Okay.
or you can start with a 2.85.
Okay.
The feedback we're getting with the 2.85 jet is it's a little bit rich. We don't quite get the EGTs we'd like to see, and fuel usage is a little bit high.
Okay.
Now, did I pass around the needle that was in this? This is an old carburetor, and here you can pass that around. You look at that needle, it's a straight taper. That needle starts thick and has a nice even taper right to the point. Okay, that's what Jabiru had until about 2 years ago when they introduced this economy tuning kit. Some of you probably heard about the economy tuning service bulletin. The economy tuning kit did a couple things. It changed the jet sizes, but most importantly changed the shape of the needle. Now what was happening, again I'll draw my little graph here. What was happening with the straight needle is exhaust, and let's put 2,000 RPM right there. Exhaust gas temps would continue to climb. They got to 21 to 2200, and for some reason there was a spike in exhaust gas temps. Came right back down again, but continued to climb right on out through 3300 and progressively leaned out. The more RPMs you had, the leaner it got. Ideally, what you'd like to see is lean condition at cruise RPMs for economy, but a little bit richer, not too rich, but a little bit richer at full power for a little more, you know, you use the gas to cool the engine a little bit, you know. And on Jabiru engines, very smooth engine, but we had always, there was a spot right around 22 to 23 Hardener RPMs. It was just a little rough. Not really rough, but a little less smooth. There was a spot right there. We knew we knew to avoid that because it wasn't smooth. We never knew really why. Well, when Don Richter explained to us what was going on, this lean spot at 2200 RPM, that's why it ran a little coarser, a little rougher at 2200 than anything else. So what did Jabiru do about that? Well, they created a new needle. First thing they did, they finally built themselves a dedicated engine test shop. where they could put it on a dyno, control the temperatures, and do extended engine runs under and control the conditions, control the temperatures, control everything. So they spent some time on the dyno and actually profiled that engine and what they needed for a carb needle. Well, what they came up with was, and here it's sitting in this needle jet, right like that. Needle's just about out of the jet, a little bit less than full throttle. You know, you're operating in here, still fairly rich. Then you pull the power back to a cruise setting, vacuum decreases to the top of the dome, the needle goes down and settles into that needle jet somewhere in here. Okay, so the fatter part of the needle now goes down in there. If, as you're flying your Zenith, you will see, if you, again, once you get used to the airplane, don't do this on your first flights, you have too much other stuff to do. But level off for cruise, let RPMs go up to, 29, 2950, and then start pulling it back and watch those EGTs. You'll see they'll be 1200, 1225, maybe up to 1250. And as you approach 2850 RPM, you'll see a rapid increase in EGTs, right on up to around 1400 if we're jetted right. Well, there's your economy cruise setting right there. On our Jabiru airplanes, that falls within 10 RPM of 2850 every time. Okay? We're climbing out at probably 2800 RPM. We're seeing 1225, 1250 for EGT temperatures. Get up to altitude, level out, let the RPMs build up, and then start pulling that throttle back. And we watch those EGTs, and right around 2850, all of a sudden that EIS will go from 1250 and it'll tick right on up to 1400. One airplane was at 2940 or 2840. You could bank on that every time. Just pull that power back and let it settle in at 2840. Look at your EGTs, 1420. Another airplane, a little bit difference in the drag of the airplane or the prop profile or something, minor difference. Well, that was 2860. But you will learn on your own airplane, watch that EGT number in the EIS or whatever instrument you have, and what should happen is after you get to altitude and level off, let RPMs build up past your lean point, and then pull it back, watch the EGTs, and after a few flights you'll know right where your number is. Maybe it's 2820, maybe it's 2860. And then you'll just watch your RPMs. You'll pull the engine back to that RPM. That'll settle in, be your economy cruise setting. So that's how you do it. So what this needle, do our little graph again. It starts down here and it goes right up, levels out for a while, and at higher RPMs, richens up. Exhaust gas temperatures decrease over 2850 RPM. That's what should happen. And what's doing it, the wider your throttle opening, the more it pulls this needle up, so it pulls it out of this jet, and you're operating just on the little skinny part of the needle instead of the fat part, letting more fuel in, richening it up. So that's probably, from a operating cost standpoint, that will be your most effective way to create an economical airplane by paying some attention to that. Now, if your airplane happens to come out of the box and be built with the same drag profile as a Jabiru J250, you probably don't have to do anything. But chances of that happening are pretty slim. And like I said, most Zeniths wind up a little on the rich side because of being a little bit draggier airplane, requiring a little bit more prop load or a little more throttle opening to achieve the same RPMs than the Jabiru airplane does. And with more throttle opening, more vacuum to the top of the dome, pulling the needle up, letting more fuel go through. So that's the theory and practice behind it. Questions? Have I confused everybody or anybody? Let me throw another little wrench into this here. We talk about a Zenith 701 like you're talking about. Because it is such a draggy airplane and your airspeed is not going to be very high, you may actually have a prop that might show you 2,900 on a static run-up, maybe 2,950 even. But you'll have the same prop loading in flight at, let's say, 2,850 with that finer prop than these other guys will have. So you have to pay some attention to your static RPM. That might give you a starting point. But on a 701, just because you're seeing 2,950 on a static run-up, I wouldn't automatically think we're going to run lean and use smaller jets, or bigger jets, I mean. You may achieve the same, let's say the Zenith uses a 64 by, let's say, 44 prop, the 701. The 601 would use a 64 by 49 prop. At 80 miles an hour with that 44 prop on the 701, you may have the same prop loading as a 601 at 120 miles an hour with a 49-inch prop. And if you do, you'll need the same loadings. But on the ground, it's obvious the engine will turn a 44-inch pitch faster than a 49-inch pitch on the ground. So, you got to start somewhere, but the place to pay real attention to is in cruise. That's where you spend 95% of your time. That's where 90% of your gas is going to be burned. Start there first. If at wide open throttle on your first flights, the engine isn't running right because it appears to be a mixture problem, well, there you can tinker with the main jet right away because that's main jet related. But the needle jet and adjusting the tuning really is a needle jet issue and an issue of how far that needle is pulled up and down out of that jet in the cruise configuration. If you have problems at full throttle, that's 99% of the time that's a main jet issue. And again, you look at your EGTs, and if they're down at 1100 or below, usually it's too rich. But we've had a couple of cases where they've been at 1100 and it's gone past peak and down to 1100. So you have to kind of watch the EGT trend there also. But 9 times out of 10, it'll be too rich. This is more of an engine thing, but I thought it was important to include in this installation seminar because that's part of making your engine work right and winding up with a 5 gallon an hour fuel flow instead of a 6 or 7 or even an 8. If you have the Sensonet carbon fiber adjustable prop, there's 2 ways to tune the carburetor. You can tune the prop or you can tune the carburetor. If you have the adjustable prop, you can take pitch out or add pitch in to match the jets that are in your carburetor. Or if you have a fixed prop, you can change the jets in your carburetor to match the prop. But one or the other has to be done.
So it's a little kit that comes along. We send this with the Firewall forward kits. And it's got the throttle extension for the 22 and 3300s. It has all the pieces and it has the pictures on the back and the instructions on the front. But basically, unwrap this little guy here. This part slips right into that part of the arm right there, and then this goes right on top of it like so. You don't even have to undo the nut here. It fits right over it, and then back through the back side. Real simple installation. Put the castle nut back on top, and then slide the cotter pin through. There it is. And then obviously bend it like you need to. And that's just the throttle arm extension.
One other operation goes
Mhm.
with that extension. You have to get the bracket. there.
Yep, here's the bracket. There you go.
Let's see, where are we going here? That,
Mm-hmm.
okay. In the top of the carburetor bracket here, you will have to drill a new hole up near the top so that your throttle cable will be aimed at here rather than the original position down here. Okay? You start 1.5 inches from the back of the sump. So what we'll do here is I'll make my mark at 1.5 inches there, and I'll come over to this side and again make my mark. 1.5 inches right there is right on the safety wire. These go on just like that. And there we are, 1/2 inch from the back of the sump. What we'll do is drill the top one here. Just take that off there. We got a 3/16 Cleco, do we? Yep. Just take it right off there. And okay, now we'll do the same thing on the other side. Let's see, there's my other bracket. Anybody want to drill a hole? Don't be bashful. I'll hold that right there. Then we'll just Cleco this in place for now. And there like that. Our oil cooler. Okay, our oil cooler is going to sit on here like this. Does it say in the directions how far up or down to put this?
Yes, to fit the bottom cowling, and then you set it up there and make sure you have
Okay.
Yeah, in other words, it doesn't really say.
Yeah, it doesn't say. And this is an operation that you put these brackets on, but then once your bottom cowl is fitted, you got to have that cowl on there, and you got to reach down in from the side. Got a couple of clamps. As the directions will tell you, where's Mark's bottom cowl? Okay, there's the bottom cowl, and this oil cooler is going to sit in here. It actually sits in here like this, and on those brackets you can slide this up and down on the brackets. So what you do, somebody with a small enough arm to reach in there, and wherever you determine to put it, just reach in there with a spring clamp of some kind. But you expand the hole that you've drilled to 3/8 and then put this grommet in your 3/8 hole. Then you'll put your mounting screw through the grommet with a Tinnerman washer. I think a Tinnerman washer sandwich.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, like that. Of course, the oil cooler is in the groove of the grommet. Tighten that up, and then that shock mounts that oil cooler a little bit so it doesn't vibrate apart. But that's the procedure. You get the bottom cowl on and in its place, and then you reach in there and position that oil cooler vertically where it needs to go. Temporarily clamp it on there, then get the cowl out of the way. Sometimes you'll square up the cooler a little bit because reaching in there it's tough to keep it square. And then that's all there is to it, really. Drill your 1/8" holes, expand the holes in the cooler to 3/8, put the grommet in, make your grommet sandwich with Tinnerman washers. Screw your countersunk screws into the nut plates that you've already put in. Nice thing about the Zenith guys, we don't have to explain to them how to put a nut plate in. Some of the fiberglass airplane guys, a nut plate, what is that? You know. So that's the oil cooler procedure in a nutshell. The rivet will only go in so far before it hits the next fin. So as you pull that rivet, you have to be pushing in when you do that, and then it'll set correctly. And when you get your cowl, it's not going to have any of this stuff in here. Mark has really overdone that.
Gone overboard.
All it has is this oil cooler scoop in it. And when you position the oil cooler in the engine, in the cowl, it's going to be sitting here roughly about like this, right in front of this scoop. And as you can see, if we didn't have this piece here, air can run right underneath the cooler and right on out the bottom. So all this little air dam is to block off air from escaping under this cooler. Now you notice on Tony's, he made his air dam out of scrap aluminum from his kit. Well, that's fine too, and some rubber baffling there. That's fine too. The Jabiru method that Jabiru uses on their own airplanes is that little air dam, and this cowl was copied off of them. And all that is, if you can picture this sitting in there, this sits in here about like so, just to come up behind that a little bit to keep the majority of the air going through the fins instead of around it.
Okay. So do you put that piece on after the fact?
Yeah, that's after the cooler is in place and you know where it is.
Okay.
And here again, the cowl is on and you're reaching down in there. And what I did, and I don't know if I put this in the instructions or not, it's a while since I wrote them, would take a little piece of tin, spare aluminum stuff, you know, 1 inch wide and so long, and again a clamp. And as I'm reaching down in there, putting it in this place, and you know, I'm angling it to a certain point, and then I just clamp that piece of aluminum from here down to the cowl, so that shows me what the angle is.
Gotcha.
Then after that's done, I mix up my 5-minute epoxy and bond the thing in place.
With it all in, you bond it with the bottom half of the cowl on the airplane?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
No.
Because you've marked it and everything.
Yeah, you mark it and everything. And this may have to be trimmed a little bit to match the, you know, the bottom of the cowl may have a little more curve than this does. So it requires a little bit of trimming maybe to make it lay flat right in there. But what we do is we take 5-minute epoxy and bond the front edge so it stays in place. Then after that's done, you can either use 5-minute or regular epoxy. We fill in underneath here and make a nice fillet that really bonds that right in place, and that's all you have to do.
The things you're trying to do is you want to get a real nice tight fit over the top of these, and it shouldn't take as much trimming as it used to. But a couple of things from your side and on my side here, your front rocker cover bolt and your rear one are the 2 bolts. You're going to have to take those bolts out first, which, just give me just a second. Just pop out the front and the rear rocker cover cap screws. And one of you guys can do the other side there. Yeah, the front and the rear.
Don't need any grinders or anything like that. Just take a pair of snips.
The Dremel tool,
Yep. I did a little bit of both. I used my tin snips, and then I used a Dremel with a sanding drum on it to smooth it out. Yeah, especially when it was getting into around the cylinders. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got a Dremel brand Dremel, and then for Christmas one year, Santa Claus brought me one of those big 100-piece, Dremel tool sets with the drums and the cutoff wheels and all that stuff in it, which I've used quite a bit, especially working on my canopy. It's been a great help working around my canopy. While Pete's cutting that out, the other thing we need to do is, like I was starting to talk about, was take a piece of safety wire, run it up through the middle cylinder, and safety wire a portion of the spring, obviously the one that's made a full loop in there, safety wire it down, and then you're going to take a little piece, it comes with the kit I believe, there's a little piece of L in there, it's very tiny with an 1/8 inch hole in it on both sides, and rivet it into the duct. And then you just take the spring and just take a pair of pliers and spring it onto here and clamp it and clip it on. And that's what holds it down onto the cylinders. So then Pete cut those out.
Almost down to where I want it.
Mm-hmm.
Won't go down anymore. Take a look in that end.
Yeah,
And you have a baffle right there, and that baffle is hitting on the head, right about right there.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So one more step, and again, you got your little Dremel. What do I do with my marker?
right here.
The Zenith ones don't have that.
Mine didn't know where I'm going to put those in. I'm going to put the center one in.
No, I mean, I'm talking about that.
Yeah, mine did not have that baffle.
Now, after this has been fitted like this, we have a couple of more steps that we have to do. Obviously, this needs to be put together down here. Okay, fiberglass top, little strip, top and bottom. Line it up, you can do that. Or you can take a scrap piece of aluminum, top and bottom if you want, and rivet the thing together. I've done that before too. To keep the air coming in from diving down under the cylinders, under the heads. Because to cool them, got to get the air up on top and draw it down through. Consequently, we have to have some kind of a dam in the front. And again, we use fiberglass because we have spare fiberglass plate from trimming inspection holes out of Jabiru airplanes and so forth. If you don't have a fiberglass plate, scrap piece of aluminum, just with the edges bent over, and you can rivet right in here. But it has to come up to the midline of the cylinder. That's what we all thought. But it's interesting. You make a ramp there, and your head temperatures go up 30 or 40 degrees.
So you want the curl.
Straight up and down dam. Jabiru told us that to start with, and I didn't believe him. I said, how can that be? And the first Jabiru we did, we put a ramp there, and we couldn't get it cool enough. And Rod Stiff said, take that ramp out of there and put a dam. Well, we did. Temperatures went right down. I think it was close to 50 degrees on the hot cylinder. It went down.
I think the dam causes it to swirl, maybe?
Must.
Tumble.
Yeah, it must.
How close does that come to the front of the cylinder?
Right against it. Yeah.
Against it?
Right against. Right, real close.
On both sides?
Yep. Real close. Yep.
It's good.
Then you're still not done. The inside needs a little baffle. In our case, for Jabiru airplanes, we need a baffle over the middle cylinder. Baffle's the wrong word, deflector. And a deflector over the front cylinder. When we start flying, we will often see the front cylinder is plenty low, the middle one is still a little too high, the back one is too high yet. So we have to shave some off of this front one. That brings the next one in line down. Then if it isn't right yet, we may have to shave a little off the middle one. And we're talking of 1/8 of an inch at a time, shaving off of these deflectors. So after several test flights and adjustment of these deflectors, we finally get the cooling balanced from front to back. But this is one thing that you will have to do to these ducts. Whether they're this style duct or whether they're the style that Mark has on his airplane, that Tony had on his airplane, you will need to put a deflector over the hot cylinder, or the one that won't cool, and definitely you'll need the deflector over the rear cylinder. Whether it's in your duct or not, it has to be there on the rear cylinder to make that. Otherwise that air just seems to run down the duct and out the back and won't cool the rear cylinder.
You're putting them,
Last thing to do is 5-minute epoxy. Take and sand that, rough that rubber surface up and rough your duct up. 5-minute epoxy and a bunch of clamps. Holding that on like so to seal the gap between cowl and duct so that you don't lose too much air out of the gap there. Exhaust gas temperature probes get located 100 millimeters or 4 inches from the head. Okay. 4 inches from the head. You can actually put them anywhere you want, but when Jabiru specifies a nominal range for operating, that's based on measuring it 100 millimeters from the head. See Mark's crest plate here. He's drilled that out to 3/8.
Oh, here you
We
go.
talked about yesterday.
Your bushing, same thing.
Here's another part you'll have to drill out to 3/8. When they come from Jabiru, they're set up for a 1/4 inch bolt on the prop, like we talked about yesterday. These prop bushings slide into there, so your bolt goes through them. What we do is put them in the vise, and we'll cushion each side with a popsicle stick or tongue depressor, and just drill them by hand. We don't do it in a drill press or anything. We just drill them by hand. So prop mounting. Okay. Then comes a spinner back plate, and you may have noticed in these instructions we have that it shows a front plate on the spinner as well as a back plate. You may have noticed Tony's spinner had a front plate on it. He had another set of screws in the front. That front plate is a pain in the rear. To try and get your spinner to keep from wobbling, almost impossible. So what we did, we stiffened up the back plate and eliminated the front plate. So if you download these instructions, you see a front plate, just ignore the front plate part of it, because it's not applicable anymore. I need to change my drawing, and need to find somebody who can do a CAD drawing. Do that. Okay. We got the spinner back plate on, got prop bushings and bolts on.
Same in storage, you want the props to be horizontal.
That's correct. You have your best shot at having the prop stop approximately horizontal if you bring number 1 cylinder up to top
Excuse
dead
me.
center,
That's okay.
and then put the prop as vertical as possible, because if the engine stops coming up on the compression stroke, it won't be to top dead center yet. It'll still be over here.
now what was he referring to, placement of the magnets?
And 6 lock nuts.
safety line.
No safety wire. Add.
Then you have this. We have a blank here that's fairly close. It's over in the other shop for a ZK profile. And what I did is I used it as a guide, and then you just started working my way out around there from there. Basically with the drum sander is what I used here. I cut it out with a cutout bit and then used a drum sander. Personally, I'm not real happy with that side of it. It's a little flatter in the top than I wanted it to be. This side I'm real happy with the profile. But just start working on it, and it took me about 2 hours, just, sand away a little bit, and then get it to where it sits flat on there, and it's even with the back edge.